She paid every bill. She paid for his car, his suits, his pride. Tonight, in front of 200 guests, he called her nothing and introduced his mistress as his upgrade. What he didn't know, the quiet billionaire watching from the shadows wasn't just her boss. He was the most feared man in New York, and he had just decided Logan Pierce would lose everything. If you're ready for justice, hit like, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels tonight. The wind off the Hudson cut through 40 stories of glass and steel, and Claire Whitmore stood at the edge of the rooftop terrace with a champagne flute she hadn't touched in 20 minutes, watching condensation slide down the glass like it was the only honest thing in the room. She'd worn the navy dress because Logan liked it. She'd curled her hair because Logan liked that too. Every choice she'd made getting ready in her bathroom that evening had been a small surrender, a small folding of herself into the shape he wanted, and she hadn't even noticed she was doing it anymore. That was the part that scared her when she let herself think about it. 2 years with a man, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd picked something. A restaurant, a movie, a shirt, purely because she wanted it. The Whitmore Holdings annual gala buzzed around her, all crystal and candlelight, and old money pretending to be new money pretending to be old. String quartet in the corner sawing through something classical and forgettable. Waiters gliding past with trays of food too small to actually eat. Claire had been to a dozen of these in her time as executive secretary to Vincent Moretti, and she knew the choreography by heart. Smile here, nod there, laugh at the joke even if it wasn't funny, because the joke was being told by someone whose last name opened doors. She caught sight of Vincent near the bar, dark suit, dark eyes, the kind of stillness that made a room organize itself around him without him lifting a finger. He wasn't laughing at anyone's joke. He never did unless he meant it. He was watching the room the way he always did, quiet, assessing, missing nothing. And for 1 second, their eyes met across 40 feet of marble and candlelight, and he gave her the smallest nod, like he was checking on her without making it a thing. She nodded back. It was their language. 2 years of working 12-hour days together had built something wordless between them, something she'd never examined too closely because examining it felt dangerous, felt like it would mean admitting things about her own life she wasn't ready to admit. Then Logan's hand landed on her waist, too hard, fingers digging in a fraction more than affection required, and the rooftop tilted back into focus. "You're hiding again," he said, smiling at her like the words were sweet. They weren't. She'd learned the difference a long time ago, the smile that reached his eyes and the smile that was a mask stretched tight over something else. This was the mask. "I'm not hiding. I'm getting air." "You're hiding." He took the champagne flute out of her hand and set it on the railing, an act so casual and so controlling that she felt the old familiar tightening in her chest, the one that lived there now, permanent as a scar. "Come on, people are asking about you." She let him lead her back toward the crowd because that was easier than the alternative, because 3 months ago she'd tried the alternative, tried saying no, tried staying where she was, and it had turned into a fight that lasted into the small hours of the morning, Logan's voice climbing and climbing until the neighbors banged on the wall. She'd learned to pick her battles. She'd learned somewhere along the way to stop having any battles at all. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, standing there in her navy dress with champagne she hadn't drunk drying sticky on her fingers, was that tonight there would be no avoiding it. Tonight the battle was already loaded, primed, and waiting for her, and Logan Pierce had been building toward it for weeks. She felt it before she understood it. The shift in the room. Logan's hand tightening around hers, steering her not toward the crowd in general, but toward the center of it, toward the open space near the makeshift stage where the string quartet usually played, and where now, for some reason, the musicians had stopped. "Logan." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "What's going on?" "Just a toast." He smiled at her again, and this time something in his eyes made the hair on her arms rise. 2 years deserves a toast, don't you think? A waiter appeared with a microphone, an actual microphone, the kind used for the CEO's annual remarks, and Claire felt the floor of her stomach drop out because there was no reason at all, for Logan Pierce, a mid-level associate at a marketing firm who'd never once paid for dinner without being asked twice, to be holding a microphone at her boss's company gala. "Excuse me, everyone," his voice boomed out over the rooftop, cutting clean through 200 private conversations, and the silence that followed was the kind that had weight, the kind you could feel pressing down on your skin. Sorry to interrupt. I've been wanting to say something for a while now, and I figured what better audience than the people who matter to Claire's career? Heads turned. Claire felt every single one of them land on her like small stones. Logan. She tried to take his arm, tried to pull him back from whatever ledge he was walking toward, but he shrugged her off with a small, sharp motion that read as casual to everyone watching and felt, to her, like a slap. Claire and I have been together 2 years, he said, and his voice had that easy, charming lilt that made people lean in instead of away, the same voice he'd used the night they met at a friend's birthday party. The voice that had convinced her, 25 years old and lonely after a string of men who hadn't bothered to learn her name right, that she'd finally found someone who saw her. 2 years. And you know what I've learned in that time? Nobody answered. Nobody was supposed to. I've learned that some people are providers. He said the word like it tasted bad in his mouth. Some people exist to pay the bills and keep the lights on and make sure everything runs smooth, so the rest of us can actually live. Claire's a provider. Damn good one, too. Paid my rent for 8 months when I was between jobs. Paid for the car, the suits. Hell, she even covered my mother's hospital bill last spring. Didn't you, baby? He looked at her, and the casual cruelty in his eyes was the first completely honest thing he'd shown her in 2 years. She's real good at providing, just not so good at being someone a man actually wants to marry. The silence cracked open into something worse, a low ripple of confused, uncomfortable murmurs. Somebody's drink glass clinking against a railing, a woman's sharp intake of breath 3 feet away. Claire's whole body had gone cold, the kind of cold that starts in the stomach and spreads out to the fingertips, the kind of cold that makes a person feel like they're watching their own life from somewhere just outside their body. What are you doing? Her voice barely carried. She didn't recognize it. I'm being honest, Claire. Finally. Logan turned slightly, angling himself in the microphone toward the crowd, performing now, fully performing. And somewhere in the back of the gathering, a woman in a deep red dress was watching with an expression that wasn't surprise. Claire would remember that later. The lack of surprise. I'd rather die than marry a woman who thinks a paycheck is the same thing as a personality. I want a partner, not a bank account with a pulse. He reached his hand out, and the woman in red stepped forward, smiling, taking it like she'd rehearsed the motion in a mirror. This is Vanessa, Logan said. She's the upgrade. The rooftop seemed to hold its breath collectively, 200 people frozen in the particular paralysis that comes from witnessing something too cruel to be entertainment and too public to be private. Somebody laughed, a short, nervous, horrified bark of a laugh, quickly smothered. A man near the bar said, low, Jesus Christ, and his date elbowed him. Claire stood there in her navy dress with her hands empty at her sides. The champagne she hadn't finished gone warm and forgotten on the railing, and she felt every cell in her body screaming at her to do something. Scream, cry, throw a drink, walk away with her spine straight and her chin high, anything. And instead she just stood there, frozen, because 2 years of being slowly, methodically unmade by this man had left her without the muscle memory for fighting back. It was Vincent who moved first. He set down his glass without a sound, the motion so controlled it barely registered, and started across the terrace. He didn't rush. Rushing would have made it a scene, would have given Logan something to feed on, and Vincent Moretti did not give people things to feed on. He moved the way he always moved through a room, like the space simply rearranged itself for him. But Claire, watching him approach through a haze of humiliation she was fighting not to drown in, saw something in his face she had never seen before. Not anger exactly, something colder and more precise than anger. The look of a man doing arithmetic, calculating a debt that had just become due. That's enough, Vincent said, and his voice didn't rise, didn't need to. It cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade through silk. Microphone, now! Logan turned, found the source of the voice, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, then a flash of irritation he tried to cover with bravado. And you are? Vincent Moretti. This is my building, my event, and that's my employee you're using as entertainment. He held out his hand, palm up, for the microphone, and there was nothing dramatic in the gesture, nothing performed. It was simply absolute. Give it to me. For a half-second, Logan looked like he might argue. Then he caught the eyes of several guests around him. The kind of guests whose names were on the sides of buildings, whose investments could end a man's career with a phone call. And some animal part of his brain recognized he was outmatched in a room full of witnesses. He handed it over with a tight, performative laugh, like the whole thing had been a joke that had run a little long. "Just being honest," he said again, weaker this time. "There's a difference between honesty and cruelty," Vincent said, and he didn't raise his voice, didn't need the microphone he was now holding loosely at his side. "You don't seem to know it. I'd suggest you learn before you embarrass yourself further." He turned, and his gaze found Claire's, and for one fraction of a second something passed between them that had nothing to do with the gala. Nothing to do with Logan or Vanessa or the 200 people watching, something that lived only in the 2 years of quiet glances and unspoken understanding they'd built across a desk, across late nights, across 1,000 small moments neither of them had ever named. "Claire," he said, gently, like the word was something fragile he was handling with care. "Walk with me." She went. There wasn't a version of this where she didn't go. He led her away from the center of the terrace, past the bar, through a side door into the building's private elevator alcove where the noise of the party fell away to almost nothing, just the distant murmur of voices and the low hum of the city 40 stories below. The elevator doors were brushed steel, and Claire caught her own reflection in them. Pale, stricken, mascara starting to blur at the corner of one eye, though she hadn't even felt herself cry. "I'm sorry," Vincent said. "I should have gotten to you faster." "You didn't do anything wrong." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated it, hated how small she sounded, hated that after everything, after building a career, after surviving things she didn't talk about, after holding herself together through every public and private degradation Logan had handed her over 2 years. This was the moment her composure finally gave out, in a marble elevator alcove with her boss watching. "Hey." Vincent's voice dropped, lost the authority it had carried on the terrace, became something quieter. "Look at me." She did. His eyes were dark, almost black in the low light, and there was something in them she'd never let herself look at directly before. Something that had been there for a long time, patient and careful, like a man standing at a respectful distance from a fire he badly wanted to be warmed by. "You're not what that man said you are," Vincent said. "Do you understand me? You're not a bank account. You're not a provider. You're the smartest person in my company, Claire, and I've worked with Harvard MBAs who couldn't read a room the way you do in your sleep. He doesn't get to define you. Not tonight. Not ever." She wanted to believe him. Some small, starving part of her did believe him, had probably believed it for longer than she wanted to admit, but the bigger, louder part of her, the part shaped by 2 years of slow erosion, just felt humiliated, exposed, picked apart in front of people who would be discussing it at brunch tomorrow. "I need to go home," she said. "I'll have a car bring you." "I can call my own car, Vincent." "I know you can." Something almost like a smile ghosted across his face, gone as quickly as it appeared. "I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying, let me do this one thing tonight, please." The please undid something in her. He so rarely asked for anything. In 2 years, she had never once heard Vincent Moretti say please to her, had never seen him beg the universe for even the smallest concession, and the word landing now, quiet and earnest, cracked something open in her chest that she didn't have the strength to examine. "Fine," she said. "Okay." He walked her down to the lobby himself, said something low to the doorman that resulted in a black town car appearing at the curb within 90 seconds. And as she climbed in, he held the door, leaning down slightly so his words wouldn't carry to the driver. "Come in late tomorrow," he said. "Take the morning, whatever you need. I have the Hargrove contracts. Claire." His voice was gentle but absolute. "Take the morning." She nodded because arguing took energy she didn't have, and the door closed and the car pulled away from the curb, and through the rear window she watched him standing on the sidewalk in his dark suit, hands in his pockets, watching the car go until it turned the corner and he disappeared from view. She cried the whole way home. Not loud, dramatic crying, the quiet, exhausted kind, tears sliding down her face while she stared out the window at Manhattan blurring past in streaks of gold and red, thinking about 8 months of rent, thinking about a hospital bill for a woman who'd never once thanked her, thinking about every dinner she'd paid for while Logan ordered the most expensive thing on the menu without asking the price, thinking about how she'd let herself become exactly what he'd said she was in front of 200 people. A provider. A bank account with a pulse. By the time she reached her apartment, the one bedroom in Murray Hill that she'd worked so hard to afford, the one with the exposed brick wall she loved, and the window that caught the morning light just right, she'd cried herself out into a kind of numb, hollow quiet. She let herself in, kicked off her heels in the entryway, and stood for a long moment in the dark of her own living room, not turning on the lights, just standing there with her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own ribs together. Her phone buzzed, a text from Logan. "We need to talk. I'm coming by." She stared at the screen for a long time before she typed back, "Don't." He came anyway. She heard his key in the lock, a key he should have given back months ago. A key she'd never asked for back because some part of her had still been clinging to the idea that this was salvageable, that 2 years meant something, that love was supposed to be hard sometimes. And she stood in the middle of her living room as the door opened and he stepped inside like he owned the place, like nothing had happened on that rooftop at all. Claire. He didn't look sorry. That was the thing she noticed first in the half-light from the street lamp outside the window. He looked annoyed, inconvenienced, like she was the one who'd ruined his evening. "We need to talk about tonight." "You need to leave. Don't be like this." He crossed the room toward her, and she took an involuntary step back, her shoulder blades nearly brushing the exposed brick wall she loved. "I was making a point. Vanessa thought it would land better in public, get it all out at once instead of dragging it out for weeks." "Vanessa thought?" Claire's voice came out flat, disbelieving. "You planned this. With her. You sat down with another woman and planned how to humiliate me in front of 200 people. It wasn't about humiliating you." Logan's jaw tightened, the first sign of real anger cracking through his composure. "It was about being honest. You heard me up there. I said what's true. You're not... Claire, you're a good person, but you're not what I need. You never were. I just didn't know how to say it without it being ugly." "That was ugly, Logan." Her hands were shaking now, and she pressed them flat against her thighs to stop it, though it didn't help. "That was the ugliest thing anyone has ever done to me. You'll get over it." He said it so casually, so dismissively, that something in her finally cracked all the way open. Not into tears this time, but into something colder, something that had been building under the surface for 2 years and had just found its first real opening. "Look, there's some practical stuff we need to sort. The lease on this place... The lease is mine, I pay it." "Right, but my name's on some of the paperwork from when we talked about moving in together officially, and there's some accounts that need untangling, and honestly, Claire, the smartest thing for both of us is if we just sign some things so it's clean. No fighting, no lawyers, just clean." Something in the careful, rehearsed way he said it, the smartest thing for both of us, just sign some things clean, made the hair on the back of her neck rise, the same animal instinct that had warned her on the rooftop before she understood what was happening. "What paperwork?" she said slowly. "Nothing complicated. I'll have it sent over. You don't even need to read the whole thing. It's mostly boilerplate." "What paperwork, Logan?" His smile flickered just for a second, the mask slipping the way it had on the rooftop right before he picked up that microphone. "Just sign it when it comes, okay? It's the easiest way to be done with all this. For both of us." He moved toward the door, pausing only to add, almost as an afterthought, "Vanessa and I are leaving the city for a while, fresh start. You should think about doing the same. New York's not going to be easy for you for a bit after tonight." The door closed behind him, and Claire stood alone in her dark living room, shaking, staring at the space where he'd been standing, replaying his words. "Just sign some things. It's mostly boilerplate. You don't even need to read the whole thing." And feeling, beneath the raw wound of public humiliation, a colder and more specific fear starting to take root. Something about the practiced ease of it. Something about the way he'd had an answer ready. Like he'd rehearsed this conversation as carefully as he'd rehearsed the speech on the rooftop. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on her couch in the dark with her knees pulled to her chest, watching the city lights flicker through her window, replaying 2 years in fragments. The small loans that never got paid back. The joint account he'd insisted they open for convenience that somehow only ever had her money going in. The times he'd asked her to sign things quickly, casually. "Don't worry about reading the fine print, baby. It's just standard stuff." And by 4 in the morning, the fear had a shape. It had a name. It sat in her chest like a stone, And she didn't know yet how deep it went. Didn't know yet that what felt like heartbreak was about to reveal itself as something far more deliberate, far more dangerous. She arrived at Vincent's headquarters the next morning at 11, hours later than usual, her eyes still swollen, concealer doing its best and failing. The Moretti Holdings building rose 52 stories over Midtown, all black glass and quiet, immaculate power, and Claire had walked through its lobby 1,000 times without ever fully registering what it represented. Not just a construction empire worth billions, but something underneath that, something the employees whispered about in elevators when they thought no one with the right last name was listening. Her assistant badge led her through the executive floor without question, the way it always did. But today the building felt different around her, charged with something she couldn't name. When she reached Vincent's office, his own assistant, Marta, looked up with an expression Claire couldn't read. Not pity exactly, something more like bracing. "He's waiting for you," Marta said. "Go on in." Vincent stood at the window when Claire entered, his back to the door, looking out over the gray morning skyline, and something about his posture, the stillness, the particular tension in his shoulders, made her stomach drop before he even turned around. "Sit down, Claire." "You're scaring me," she said. But she sat. He turned to face her, and his expression was the one she'd seen on the rooftop the night before. The cold, precise arithmetic look, the look of a man who had already done the math on a debt and was now deciding exactly how it would be collected. "I need to show you something," he said, "and I need you to understand that I had this work started before last night, before the gala. I've had my head of security looking into Logan Pierce for 3 weeks. Claire's mouth went dry. "Why?" "Because 2 months ago, my financial team flagged irregular activity tied to a transfer authorization that touched one of our vendor accounts, traced back through 3 shell entities to a name I recognized." Vincent's voice was steady, measured, but something underneath it vibrated with restrained fury. "Your name, Claire, as the unwitting signatory." He turned a slim black folder around on the desk and slid it toward her, and Claire's hands trembled as she opened it, and what she found inside made the floor of the world tilt sideways. Bank statements with transfers she'd never authorized, a property deed for her apartment with a co-ownership filing she'd never signed, correspondence between Logan and a woman named Vanessa Brooks that stretched back not weeks, not months, but the better part of a year, planning, in cold and explicit detail, exactly how and when to take everything Claire had built and disappear before she ever understood what had happened to her. "Vincent," she whispered, staring at a page that detailed a forged signature on a property transfer dated 2 weeks earlier, her own name rendered in a hand that was almost her own. This can't be real." "It's real," he said quietly, "and there's more. I need you to keep reading, and then I need you to understand something else, something I should have told you a long time ago, because after tonight I don't think I can wait any longer to say it." Claire looked up at him, tears already blurring her vision, the folder shaking in her hands, and somewhere behind the controlled grief and rising rage, she felt a new and terrifying clarity arriving. The rooftop, the speech, the new woman, all of it had been theater, every single piece of it staged to break her down just enough that she would sign whatever was placed in front of her without a fight. And the man standing in front of her now, the quiet, careful billionaire she had worked beside for 2 years without ever asking the questions. Everyone else in the building seemed too frightened to ask, was about to tell her exactly who he really was, and exactly how far he was willing to go to make sure Logan Pierce never touched another piece of her life again. Claire's hands were still shaking when she set the folder down on Vincent's desk, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. The only sound, the soft hum of the building's climate control and the distant murmur of midtown traffic 52 floors below. 22 months, Vincent said finally. She looked up. "What? You asked me 3 weeks ago why I never take vacation. I told you I didn't trust anyone to run things while I was gone." He came around the desk, slow, like a man approaching something fragile he didn't want to startle. "That wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the whole truth either. The truth is I haven't taken a real vacation in 22 months because that's how long I've known I was in love with you, and I didn't trust myself to be anywhere you weren't." Claire's breath caught hard in her throat. "Vincent, I'm not finished." His voice stayed level, but his jaw was tight, like the words cost him something to get out. "I know how you take your coffee. Black, no sugar, except on Mondays, when you put in cream because Mondays are hard for you and you won't admit it. I know you call your mother every Sunday at 6, and the calls usually run 40 minutes unless something's wrong, and then they run 2 hours. I know you haven't bought yourself a single thing that wasn't on sale in over a year, and I know exactly why, and I have known about Logan Pierce a lot longer than 3 weeks. He stopped, exhaled, something in him visibly fighting to stay controlled. I should have said something sooner. I told myself it wasn't my place. I was wrong. She stood up so fast the chair scraped back against the floor, her pulse hammering somewhere up near her throat. You knew! You knew what he was doing to me, and you said nothing? I didn't know the extent of it until 3 weeks ago, when the transfer flagged. That's not what I asked you. Her voice cracked upward, sharp, and she didn't try to soften it. You're telling me you've been in love with me for almost 2 years, watching me get smaller and smaller in that relationship, and you just, what, observed? Took notes? Waited for the financial records to confirm it before you said a word? Yes. He didn't flinch from it. Because the alternative was telling my executive secretary I had feelings for her while she was in a relationship, which would have been a violation of every boundary I have ever respected with you, and an abuse of the power I hold over your job. I made a choice, Claire. Maybe it was the wrong one, but I wasn't going to be another man in your life who used what he had over you to get something he wanted. The room went quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of a held breath, a fuse burning down somewhere out of sight. Claire pressed both hands flat against her sternum like she was trying to keep something from climbing up out of her chest. I don't know what to do with that right now, she said. I don't know what to do with any of this. 20 minutes ago, I thought my biggest problem was that my boyfriend humiliated me at a party. Now you're telling me he forged my signature on a property deed. I know. Do you? Something in her snapped loose, 2 years of careful composure unraveling at once. Because from where I'm standing, Vincent, you've just told me you've been silently obsessed with me for almost 2 years while sitting 15 feet from my desk every single day. And I had no idea, and now I'm supposed to process that, and the fact that the man I gave 8 months of rent money to was apparently planning to steal my apartment the whole time. That's a lot. That is genuinely a lot to be handed in one conversation. I'm not asking you to process it right now. Vincent's voice gentled, dropped, the executive armor falling away into something almost raw. I'm asking you to let me help you stop him. The rest, what I feel, what you do with that can wait as long as it needs to. Logan can't wait. He's already moving. If we don't act today, he disappears with everything you own and you spend the next 5 years in court trying to get it back. If you get it back at all. Claire's phone buzzed in her bag. She ignored it. It buzzed again. Answer it, Vincent said quietly. It's probably him. It was. Did you get the paperwork yet? Signed by tomorrow. Makes everything easier. She read it twice, her vision blurring at the edges, and then turned the screen so Vincent could see it. His expression didn't change much, but something behind his eyes went very still and very cold, the look of a man recalculating a timeline. Tomorrow, he said. He wants it signed by tomorrow. That tells me they're planning to move money or leave the country within the week. Probably both. How do you know that? Because I've spent 15 years learning how people hide money, Claire, and the pattern's the same every time. Rush the signature, lock the asset, disappear before anyone can ask questions. He picked the folder back up, flipped it open to a page she hadn't reached yet. Wire transfer logs, a property listing under a name she didn't recognize, a flight booking confirmation for 2 passengers, departure in 9 days, destination Lisbon. He's already bought the tickets. Claire stared at the booking confirmation until the letters stopped meaning anything, just shapes on a page, and somewhere underneath the shock, a new feeling was rising, slow and hot, climbing up through her sternum and into her throat. Not grief, not anymore. Something closer to rage, raw and unfamiliar, because she had spent 2 years swallowing her own anger so carefully that she'd forgotten what it felt like loose in her body. He used my mother's hospital bill, she said quietly. He looked me in the eye and let me believe paying that bill was an act of love, and the entire time he was planning to leave the country with my apartment. Yes. I want to see her. Claire's voice had gone flat, dangerous. Vanessa, I want to see what she looks like up close, not from across a rooftop. That's not a good idea right now. I didn't ask if it was a good idea. Vincent studied her for a long moment, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not approval exactly, but recognition, like he was watching the woman he'd fallen for finally show a piece of herself he'd suspected was there all along and had never been allowed to see. Vanessa Brooks works in marketing for a firm 2 blocks from here, Crest Hill Media. I had her flagged the same week I had Logan flagged. You've been investigating her too. I investigate anyone who gets close to people I care about. He said it simply, no apology in it. It's not always pretty, what I do to protect the people in my life. I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make myself look better in front of you. Something about the bluntness of it, the total absence of performance, landed harder than any reassurance could have. Claire looked at him for a long beat, taking in the man who had just confessed to loving her for 2 years and investigating her boyfriend like a hostile asset in the same conversation, and felt something complicated tighten in her chest, grief and fury, and the dizzying beginning of something else she didn't have a name for yet. Her phone buzzed a 3rd time. This time, it wasn't Logan. Unknown number. You don't know me, but you should. We need to talk before you sign anything. V. Claire showed Vincent the screen, and his expression sharpened instantly. Vanessa, he said, or someone using her initial. Could be a trap, could be a conscience. Either way, we don't ignore it. You want me to meet her? I want you to let me come with you. No. The word came out before she'd even finished thinking it, surprising them both. No, Vincent. If she wants to talk to me, she wants to talk to me, not the billionaire standing behind my shoulder like a loaded gun. If you're there, she clams up, or she runs, or she lies harder than she's already lying. I need this alone. Claire, you said it yourself. You respect my boundaries. Her voice was steadier now, finding its footing, finding the version of herself that had existed before Logan started filing it down. Respect this one. I'll take security with me if it makes you feel better, but I go in alone. Vincent's jaw worked, the muscle ticking once, twice, a man visibly fighting every protective instinct he had. Fine, he said finally, but you take Dante. He waits outside the door, not in the room, but he's there, and you call me the second you walk out, whatever happens in there. Deal. They met at a coffee shop in Midtown, neutral ground, gray afternoon light coming weak through the windows. Claire arrived first, sat at a corner table with her back to the wall, a habit she didn't used to have and now apparently did, and watched the door until Vanessa Brooks walked through it. Up close, without the cocktail dress and the rooftop lighting, Vanessa looked younger than Claire expected, and more frightened. She sat down across from Claire without ordering anything, hands wrapped tight around each other on the tabletop, knuckles pale. Thank you for coming, Vanessa said. I almost didn't. I know. I wouldn't have either, if I were you. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward the window, toward the street, toward anything that wasn't Claire's face. I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand I'm not doing this because I feel guilty about you. I'm doing it because I'm scared. Of what? Of him. Vanessa's voice dropped low, barely above a whisper. Logan's not what you think he is. He's not what I thought he was either, not at first. He told me you two were already basically over, that you'd been distant for a year, that he just hadn't found the right time to end things. I believed him because it was easier than not believing him. She swallowed hard. Then I found out about the deed, the property transfer. He told me it was a joint asset you two were splitting fairly because you'd both contributed. He never told me he forged your signature, Claire. I found that out 3 days ago, and I have not slept since. Claire's hands curled into fists under the table, nails biting into her palms. What do you want from me? I want you to know I'm not signing anything either. He wants me on a flight to Lisbon with him in 9 days, and I keep thinking about how easy it was for him to lie to both of us at the same time for over a year, without either of us catching it. And I keep wondering what happens to me once we land somewhere I don't know anyone and don't speak the language and he decides I've outlived my usefulness too. Her eyes were wet now, fear plain and unglamorous on her face. I don't expect you to feel sorry for me. I did something unforgivable to you. I stood there and let him call you nothing in front of 200 people, and I smiled like I'd won something. But I need you to know what's coming, because if I don't tell someone, I think I'm going to disappear into this and never get out. What's coming? Claire said, very quietly. He's not just taking your apartment. Vanessa leaned forward, voice dropping further. There's an account, offshore, set up 6 weeks ago, and he's been quietly funneling money into it from 3 different sources. Your savings, a business loan he took out using forged documentation with your name on it as a guarantor, and a chunk of money from his own family that he told them was for a real estate investment. He's planning to liquidate everything the second your signature clears, wire it all into that account, and we leave the country before anyone notices the gaps. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara she didn't seem to notice. He's done this before, Claire. Not exactly this, but close. There was a woman before you. I found her name in an old email thread he forgot to delete. I don't know what happened to her, but I know she's not in New York anymore, and I know nobody talks about her. The coffee shop noise faded into a dull ringing in Claire's ears. A loan in her name. A guarantor she'd never agreed to be. A woman before her who'd vanished from the city without explanation. I need her name, Claire said. The woman before me. I don't have a name, just initials in the email signature. RM. Vanessa shook her head, miserable. I looked. I couldn't find anything. It's like she never existed. Claire stood up so abruptly, her chair nearly tipped, and Vanessa flinched back like she expected to be struck. I'm not going to hurt you, Claire said, voice shaking now with something closer to nausea than rage. But I need to go. I need to call someone. Claire, Vanessa's voice stopped her at the door. If you take him down, and I think you're about to, I can see it on your face. Take me down too if you have to. I deserve it. Just don't let him walk away from this clean. Please. Claire didn't answer. She walked out into the gray afternoon, found Dante waiting exactly where Vincent had promised, his big frame a wall of quiet calm against the chaos in her chest, and called Vincent before the door had even fully swung shut behind her. There's another woman, she said, the second he picked up, words tumbling out fast and raw. Before me. Initials RM. Vanessa thinks something happened to her. Thinks she disappeared from the city, and there's an offshore account, Vincent, 6 weeks old, and a forged business loan with my name on it as guarantor, and he's done this before. This isn't his first time. This is a pattern. Claire, breathe. Vincent's voice came through low and steady, an anchor in a current trying to pull her under. Where are you right now? Outside the coffee shop. Dante's with me. Good. Stay there. I'm sending the car. And I'm calling Marcus right now to start pulling everything we can find on RM. Full name, last known address, anything. A pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped into a register Claire hadn't heard from him before. Something underneath the calm that sounded almost dangerous. Claire, listen to me carefully. If Logan Pierce has done this before and gotten away with it, that means somewhere out there is a woman who either disappeared or is too frightened to come forward. I need you to understand what that means about the kind of man we're dealing with. This isn't just financial fraud anymore. I know what it means. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. I've known him for 2 years and I never once asked the question I should have asked the very first week. Why did the last relationship end so fast? With no explanation, no name, nothing. I just took his word for it. I took everything on his word. That's not a failure on your part. That's what predators are good at. A door closed somewhere on Vincent's end of the line, sharp and final, like he'd just shut himself into a private room. I want you to come back here. Not to the office, to my home. I don't want you alone in that apartment tonight. Not with him still holding a key. Not with everything we now know. He won't come back tonight. He thinks he's winning. That's exactly why I don't want you alone. A beat. Please, Claire. She almost argued. The old instinct rose up automatically, the years of training herself to need nothing from anyone, to be the provider and never the one provided for. And then she thought of Logan's key turning in her lock the night before, the casual entitlement of it, the way he'd stepped into her apartment like it had already stopped being hers, and something in her resistance gave way. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll come. The car arrived 12 minutes later. Claire sat in the back seat watching Manhattan slide past the window in long gray smears, and somewhere around 57th Street, her phone buzzed one more time. A text from a number she didn't recognize, no name attached. Heard you had coffee with Vanessa today. Disappointing. We had a deal, baby. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The paperwork's already in your inbox. Sign it tonight, or things get complicated for both of us. L. Her stomach turned to ice. We had a deal. As if she'd ever agreed to anything. As if her silence under 2 years of slow erosion had ever once been consent. She forwarded the message to Vincent without a word of explanation because none was needed, and within 90 seconds her phone rang, his name lighting up the screen. "He's threatening you now," Vincent said, no preamble, his voice gone hard and flat in a way she'd never heard before, not once in 2 years of working beside him. He's panicking. Vanessa probably told him she's having second thoughts, and he thinks I'm the reason. You are the reason. You're the only thing standing between him and a clean exit, and he knows it. A pause, and Claire could hear, faintly, the sound of a door opening on his end, footsteps. The particular acoustic hush of a large space. "I need you to send me that email he says is in your inbox. Don't open any links in it. Don't sign anything. Don't reply. Don't engage with him at all. Forward it straight to Marcus, and I'm going to have my legal team look at every clause in it tonight. And then what? And then tomorrow morning, Logan Pierce finds out exactly what happens to people who threaten you." There was no theater in the way he said it, no rage, no raised voice, just a flat, terrible certainty that frightened her more than shouting ever could have. "I've spent 2 years being careful with you, Claire. Careful not to overstep. Careful not to use what I have to take anything from you that wasn't freely given. I am done being careful with him." The car pulled up outside a townhouse in the Upper East Side, limestone and ironwork, more understated than she'd expected from a man whose name was on half the skyline, and Dante opened her door before she'd even reached for the handle. Vincent was waiting on the front steps, no jacket, sleeves rolled to the forearm, looking like a man who'd been pacing. "Show me the email," he said, the second she was close enough. She pulled out her phone, opened the message, and turned the screen toward him without a word. He read it in silence, his expression sliding from controlled to something colder with every line. And when he reached the bottom, a digital signature line waiting for her name, a clause buried in dense legal language that, translated, signed away not just the apartment but any future claim to damages, any right to pursue him legally for what he'd already taken. His hand tightened around the phone hard enough that Claire heard the faint creak of the case. "He's not just trying to steal from you," Vincent said quietly. "He's trying to make it impossible for you to ever come after him for it. This clause here," he turned the screen toward her, pointed. "This is a full release of claims. If you sign this, Claire, even what we already have on him becomes nearly impossible to prosecute. He's had a lawyer draft this. This isn't desperation. This is a man executing a plan he's run before." "RM," Claire said, the realization landing cold and heavy in her chest. He made her sign something like this too. That's why nobody talks about her. That's why there's no trail. That's my read on it too. Vincent handed the phone back, and for a moment his composure cracked. Just slightly. Just enough that Claire saw the full weight of what he was carrying. Not just love for her, but fury at a man who had hurt her, and very possibly hurt someone before her badly enough to make them vanish. "I have people searching public records right now for any woman with those initials who left New York in the last 5 years under circumstances that don't add up. If she's out there, we'll find her. And if Logan Pierce thinks he can threaten you into silence the way he apparently threatened her, he's about to learn that the difference between her and you is that you have me, and I don't lose." Claire stood on the limestone steps in the fading gray light, phone still warm in her hand from the threat sitting in her inbox, and felt the last fragile illusion she'd been clinging to, that this was still somehow salvageable, that Logan was simply a man who'd made bad choices under pressure, burn away completely. What stood in its place wasn't grief anymore. It was clarity, sharp-edged and merciless, and beneath it something that felt dangerously close to the same cold calculation she saw in Vincent's eyes. "I want to see this through," she said. "All of it, whatever it takes. It might get ugly." "It already is ugly, Vincent. He just hasn't found out yet how ugly it's about to get for him." She held his gaze steady now, the shaking finally gone from her hands. "Find RM. Find out what he did to her. And then let's finish this." Vincent's phone rang inside the house, sharp and sudden in the quiet evening air. And something about the urgency of the second ring made both of them go still. He answered it standing on the steps beside her, and Claire watched his face change in real time. the controlled fury sharpening into something else, something that looked, for the first time since she'd known him, almost like fear. "Say that again," he said into the phone, voice low. A pause. "You're certain it's her?" Another pause, longer, his free hand coming up to grip the iron railing beside him hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "Where is she now?" He listened for another 10 seconds, his jaw going tighter with every word. And when he finally lowered the phone and turned to face Claire, the look in his eyes told her, before he'd even said a word, that whatever he'd just learned about Logan Pierce had nothing to do with stolen money at all. Architected narrative twist revealing rival mafia conspiracy. Targeting protagonist's vulnerability. Architected narrative twist revealing rival mafia conspiracy. Targeting protagonist's vulnerability. Vincent lowered the phone slowly, and the evening light caught the side of his face in a way that made him look 10 years older than he had 30 seconds earlier. "Vincent?" Claire's voice came out thin. "Tell me." "Rachel Mendez." He said the name like it cost him something to release it into the air. 29 years old, worked as a paralegal at a firm on 42nd Street 4 years ago, dated Logan Pierce for 14 months. She didn't disappear, Claire. She's alive. She's in Albany, and she's been refusing to talk about Logan Pierce to anyone for 4 years, including 2 private investigators and 1 detective who tried to reopen an old fraud complaint that got buried. Buried by who? That's the question, isn't it? Vincent's eyes had gone flat and dark, calculating in a way that made the hair on Claire's arms rise. Logan Pierce is a marketing associate who makes maybe $90,000 a year. He doesn't have the kind of money or connections it takes to bury a police complaint. Somebody did that for him. The wind picked up off the avenue cold enough now that Claire wrapped her arms around herself on the limestone steps, watching Vincent's face shift through calculations she couldn't follow. "You think he's working for someone?" "I think a man who's run this exact play before on a woman with no connections and managed to make a fraud complaint disappear is not acting alone." Vincent's jaw worked. "I think I need to stop treating Logan Pierce like a problem and start treating him like a symptom." Inside the townhouse, his phone rang again. The landline this time, the one Claire had only ever heard ring twice in 2 years of working for him, both times during what Marta had later, carefully, described as family matters. Vincent's whole body went rigid at the sound. "Go inside," Claire said. "Take it. I'll wait." "No." He caught her wrist gently before she could step back. "Come with me. Whatever this is, I'd rather you hear it than wonder about it." The study inside was dark wood and low light, a desk that looked older than either of them, and Vincent picked up the receiver with the particular wariness of a man who already suspected what was coming. "Yeah." A pause. Claire watched his shoulders climb toward his ears, slow, vertebra by vertebra. "When?" Another pause. Longer. "Say it again." She couldn't hear the voice on the other end, just a low, urgent murmur, but she watched Vincent's free hand close into a fist on the desk, watched the knuckles whiten, watched something break across his face that she'd never seen there before. Not anger, not the cold arithmetic from the rooftop. Something closer to dread. "Don't move on it until I get there," he said, and hung up without saying goodbye. "Vincent." Claire's heart was slamming now, adrenaline she didn't fully understand flooding her chest. "What is it?" He turned to face her, and for one terrible second he didn't answer at all, just looked at her like he was trying to figure out how to hand her something that would break in her hands the moment she touched it. "Logan Pierce doesn't work in marketing," he said finally. "Not really. That's the cover. He's been on retainer for the last 3 years to a man named Dominic Castellano." The name landed in the room like a dropped glass. Claire didn't recognize it, but she watched it land on Vincent like a physical blow, watched his whole body go still in the specific way that meant something old and dangerous had just resurfaced. "Who is that?" "The man who killed my father." Vincent's voice was perfectly flat, perfectly controlled, and that control was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. 11 years ago, it was ruled an accident, a car going off the West Side Highway in the rain. I was 22. I knew it wasn't an accident the day it happened, and I have spent 11 years unable to prove it because Dominic Castellano does not leave evidence. He leaves intermediaries, men like Logan Pierce. Claire's mouth had gone bone dry. "You're telling me Logan didn't just happen to fall in love with me?" I'm telling you, Logan Pierce has spent 2 years inside my company, inside my life, attached to the one person closest to me who isn't blood, gathering intelligence and slowly destabilizing you financially and emotionally, and I don't think for 1 second that's a coincidence. Vincent's hands were braced flat on the desk now, head down, and when he looked up, his eyes had gone glassy with a fury so total it had stopped registering as anger and become something closer to ice. Rachel Mendez wasn't his first target either, Claire. I'd bet everything I own on it. He's a tool, Castellano's tool, and he's been pointed at you since before you ever applied for the executive secretary position. The floor seemed to drop several inches beneath Claire's feet. That's not possible. I applied for that job through a normal posting. I interviewed with HR. Nobody arranged that. Did they? Vincent's voice had a terrible gentleness to it now, the gentleness of a man delivering news he already knew would gut her. Marcus is pulling your hiring file right now. I told him to check it the second I hung up the phone, because the man on the other end of that call just told me something that's been sitting wrong in my stomach since the second sentence out of his mouth. Claire, the HR director who processed your application 4 years ago resigned 8 months later and took a position at a firm that, on paper, does marketing consulting. The same firm Logan Pierce supposedly worked for when you met him at that birthday party. Claire sat down hard in the leather chair across from the desk, her legs simply giving out from underneath her, the room tilting at an angle that had nothing to do with the lighting. You're saying I was placed in your company, specifically so Logan could. I'm saying I don't know yet, and I hate not knowing. Vincent came around the desk and crouched in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his, and his grip was the only steady thing in a room that had stopped making sense. But I'd rather tell you what I'm afraid of than let you find out from someone else. If Castellano placed you near me on purpose, then everything that's happened, the gala, the humiliation, Logan's panic about the signature, none of it was really about you and Logan at all. It was about getting close enough to me to do real damage. You were never the target, Claire. You were the door. The words hit her harder than anything Logan had said on that rooftop, harder than the forged deed, harder than the offshore account. Because all of it, every single humiliating, eroding moment of the last 2 years, had not even been about her. She had spent 2 years being slowly unmade by a man who saw her not as a person to break, but as a hinge to swing open, and the realization arrived in her chest like something physically collapsing. Say something, Vincent said quietly. Please. I don't know what to say. Her voice came out a whisper, raw. I gave that man 8 months of rent. I sat at his mother's hospital bedside. I thought, God, Vincent, I actually thought for a long time that I loved him, and the whole time I was just a door someone was trying to pick the lock on. You didn't know. I should have known something. 2 years and I never once asked the right question, never once pulled on the thread that would have unraveled it. Her voice cracked, and the tears came fast now, ugly and unstoppable. 2 years of carefully managed composure finally giving way completely. I'm an idiot, Vincent. I built my whole life around a man who was never real, who was a weapon someone pointed at the person I actually... She stopped herself, but it was too late. Vincent's eyes had gone very still, very focused, and Claire felt her own face heat with the realization of what she'd almost said out loud, in a study full of dread and revelation, with mascara running down her face. Finish the sentence, he said, low. Don't. Claire. His thumb moved against the back of her hand, slow, deliberate. Finish it. The person I actually care about, she said, barely audible, looking at their joined hands instead of his face because she didn't trust herself to say it while looking at him. There. Are you happy? In the middle of finding out my whole life was a setup orchestrated by the man who killed your father, I'm also apparently in love with my boss. Pick whichever crisis you want to deal with first. Something moved across Vincent's face that, in any other moment, might have been the beginning of a smile, but it died fast, smothered by the weight of everything else sitting in the room. We deal with both, he said, but not tonight. Tonight we deal with the fact that Dominic Castellano has had a man inside my orbit for 2 years, and that means he knows things about my operation that no outsider should know. My security routines, my travel patterns, my financial structure. Everything Logan could have overheard from you, even accidentally, even innocently, is information Castellano has had access to. Claire felt sick. I talked about your schedule with him, casually. The kind of thing you say to a boyfriend. Vincent's traveling to Chicago next week. Vincent's got board meetings all month. I'll be working late because of the Hargrove deal. She pressed a shaking hand over her mouth. I told him things. I didn't think. Why would I have thought? Because you didn't know you were dating a weapon. Vincent's voice sharpened. Not at her, but at the air, at the situation, at 11 years of buried grief suddenly cracking back open. This is not your fault, Claire. I need you to hear that and actually believe it, because I can see you starting to build a case against yourself in your head right now, and I'm telling you to stop. The study door opened without a knock. A violation that, in 2 years of working in Moretti buildings, Claire had never once seen happen. And a broad-shouldered man in a dark jacket stepped inside, breathing hard, like he'd run up the stairs. Vincent was on his feet instantly, body angled between Claire and the door, before she'd even processed the movement. Marcus. Vincent's voice had dropped into something low and dangerous. This better be good. It's not good. Marcus's eyes flicked to Claire, then back to Vincent, a silent question about whether he should speak in front of her. Vincent didn't move, didn't give him the privacy he was asking for. The HR director, Claire's hiring file traces too. I found her. She's dead, Vincent. 8 months after she left the company, found in her apartment in Connecticut. Ruled a suicide. The air went out of the room. When? Vincent said. 3 years ago, 2 weeks after she gave a deposition in a civil case that named Castellano Logistics as a defendant. Marcus's jaw tightened. There's something else. I pulled Logan Pierce's financials like you asked. Found a payment, 18 months ago, $11,000, routed through 3 accounts before it lands in his. The originating account traces to a shell company registered to an address in Bayonne that's come up twice before in our files on Castellano's operation. Claire felt the room narrow down to a pinpoint, the way it had on the rooftop, the way it had reading the forged deed, except this time the dread wasn't personal. It was structural, architectural. The sense of a building she'd been standing inside for 2 years suddenly revealing itself to be balanced on something rotten. There's more, Marcus said, and something in his voice made Vincent go very still. We've had a man watching Logan's apartment since this morning, per your instructions. 20 minutes ago, a car pulled up. Logan got in. Vanessa wasn't with him. Where'd he go? That's the problem. Marcus's eyes cut to Claire again, apologetic now, like he wished he didn't have to say the next part in front of her. The car's registered to Castellano Logistics. Our guy followed for 6 blocks before he lost them in traffic near the tunnel. Vincent, if Logan's meeting with Castellano's people right now, and he knows we pulled Vanessa's loyalty out from under him today, knows we're closing in on the financial trail, he'll tell them everything. Vincent's voice had gone hollow. Every detail Claire ever mentioned about my schedule, my security, this house. Logan Pierce just became a liability to Castellano the moment we started pulling threads, and a man like that doesn't get protected when he becomes a liability. He gets used one last time and disposed of. Used how? Claire said, though some animal part of her already knew the answer before she finished asking. Vincent turned to look at her, and the expression on his face, grief and fury and a terrible, focused fear all tangled together, told her everything before he said a single word. Used to get to me, he said. And the easiest way to get to me right now, tonight, is through the one person Castellano's organization has spent 2 years learning everything about. His hand found hers again, gripping hard enough to hurt. Claire, I need you to listen to me very carefully, because I'm not going to ask you to do anything I'm not certain is necessary. You cannot go back to your apartment tonight. You cannot be anywhere predictable. If Logan is sitting in a car with Castellano's people right now, telling them every address, every routine, every weakness he ever pulled out of you across 2 years of pillow talk, then the next 12 hours are the most dangerous you have ever lived through, and I am not going to let you face them anywhere I can't protect you. Marcus's radio crackled at his hip, sharp static cutting through the heavy silence of the study, and a voice came through low and urgent, words clipped too fast for Claire to fully catch. Something about a vehicle, a license plate, a street 2 blocks from her apartment, and she watched both men's faces go rigid at the same instant, watched Vincent's hand close around hers like a vice, watched Marcus already moving toward the door before the message had even finished. They're already there, Marcus said. Outside her building. Right now. Orchestrated climactic action sequence with gritty American tone and cliffhanger ending. Orchestrated climactic action sequence with gritty American tone and cliffhanger ending. Vincent moved before Claire's mind even caught up with the words, his hand closing around her wrist and pulling her toward the door, Marcus already barking into the radio in short, clipped bursts that didn't sound like English so much as code drilled into muscle memory. "Get her in the car," Vincent said. Now. Back exit, not the front. "Vincent, what's happening?" "They're outside your building. That's all I know, and it's all the time we have to talk about it." He had her down the hallway, down a narrow service staircase she hadn't even known the townhouse had, his grip on her arm firm but not rough, steadying instead of dragging. Behind them, she heard Marcus on the phone again, voice low and urgent. The words "eyes on the vehicle" and "do not engage" the only fragments she caught clearly. The back exit dumped them into an alley running parallel to the avenue, and a black SUV was already idling there, engine running, headlights off. Vincent shoved Claire into the back seat and climbed in after her, and the second the door shut, Marcus was in the front passenger seat, and the driver had already pulled out, tires gripping wet asphalt hard enough that Claire's body slammed sideways into Vincent's shoulder. "Talk to me," Vincent said, leaning forward toward Marcus. "What do we know?" Two men, sitting in a gray sedan parked across from her building for the last 11 minutes. Plates registered to a logistics company that's a known Castellano front. Our guy clocked them watching the entrance, not approaching. Marcus's voice was flat, professional, the voice of a man compartmentalizing fear into procedure, because procedure was the only thing that kept hands steady. Could be surveillance, could be worse. "Where's Logan now?" "Lost him after the tunnel. No eyes on him since." Claire's heart was a fist against her ribs, each beat landing hard enough to hurt. She stared out the window at Manhattan strobing past in sodium light, and her own reflection ghosted over it, pale, eyes too wide, a woman she barely recognized. "This is insane," she said, mostly to herself. 24 hours ago I was worried about a seating chart. 24 hours ago you didn't know what you were standing next to. Vincent's hand found hers in the dark of the back seat, gripping hard, and his voice dropped, quiet enough that it felt like it was meant only for her despite Marcus sitting 3 feet away. "I need you to listen to me. Whatever happens in the next hour, you do exactly what I say, when I say it, without arguing. Not because I think you're incapable, because I have done this before and you haven't, and right now that difference keeps you alive." "Okay?" Her voice shook, but the word came out steady enough. The SUV took a hard right 2 blocks from her building, cutting through a side street Claire didn't recognize, and Marcus twisted around in his seat. "We're not going to the apartment. Vincent wants eyes confirmed before you're anywhere near that block. My things are in there, my laptop, Your life is not in there," Vincent said, sharp enough to cut her off completely. "Everything else is replaceable." They pulled instead into an underground garage 3 blocks south, fluorescent light flickering overhead, concrete pillars throwing long shadows, and the second the SUV stopped, Vincent was out his door and around to hers before she'd even gotten her seatbelt off. "Stay close," he said. "Stay behind me." They were halfway to the elevator bank when the gray sedan rolled down the ramp behind them, slow, deliberate, headlights cutting white across the concrete. "Down!" Marcus snapped, and Vincent's arm was already around Claire, pulling her behind a support pillar hard enough that her shoulder cracked against concrete and a bright flare of pain shot down her arm. She bit back the sound that wanted to come out of her. The sedan stopped 20 feet away. 2 doors opened. Claire's breath came in short, useless gasps, her whole body locked rigid against the pillar, Vincent's chest pressed against her back, his heartbeat hammering against her shoulder blade nearly as fast as her own. "Moretti." A voice, male, unfamiliar, carrying easily across the empty garage. "We're not here for trouble, just a message." "Then deliver it from 20 feet and get back in your car," Vincent called back. And Claire felt the change in him immediately. The warmth gone, replaced by something flat and lethal. A voice she hadn't heard from him before tonight, and hoped never to hear again outside of moments like this one. "Mr. Castellano wants you to know the girl was never personal," the voice said. "Business gets complicated when people start pulling threads they shouldn't pull. Tell your financial people to stop looking at accounts that don't concern them, and everybody walks away from this clean. Keep pulling, and clean stops being on the table." Where's Logan Pierce? Vincent called back. A pause. Long enough that Claire felt Vincent's whole body coil tighter behind her. Pierce had an accident tonight, the voice said, and something about the casualness of it, the total absence of weight given to a human life, made Claire's stomach drop straight through the concrete floor. Tragic. Boyfriend troubles, apparently. Should be in the news by morning. Real shame. Marcus's hand moved, slow, toward something inside his jacket, and Vincent's voice cracked across the garage like a whip. Don't. Smart, the unfamiliar voice said, almost amused. We're leaving now. Consider this a courtesy, Moretti. Mr. Castellano doesn't always send a warning first. Car doors closed, engine revved. Tires screeched against concrete as the sedan reversed hard and peeled back up the ramp, and the garage fell silent except for 3 sets of ragged breathing and the dying echo of rubber on concrete fading into the street above. Vincent didn't move for 3 full seconds. His arms still locked around Claire, his breath coming hard and fast against the back of her neck. When he finally stepped back, his face had gone the color of old ash. They killed him, Claire said, barely a whisper. They actually killed him. We don't know that yet. But Vincent's voice didn't carry conviction, and Marcus was already on his phone, voice low and urgent, calling someone to check hospitals, check the morgue, check anywhere a body matching Logan Pierce's description might have surfaced in the last hour. He used me. Claire's hands had started shaking again, the adrenaline curdling into something closer to horror. He destroyed my life and lied to me for 2 years, and he just got murdered in some garage or alley or wherever they dumped him. And I don't even know how to feel about that, Vincent. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel. Vincent's hands came up to her face, framing it, forcing her eyes to his even as her whole body trembled. Look at me. Look at me, Claire. None of what happens to Logan Pierce tonight is something you have to carry. He chose Castellano. He chose every lie. The only thing you have to focus on right now is staying alive long enough for me to end this. Do you understand me? End it how? Her voice cracked upward, half hysteria, half fury. You heard him. He said keep pulling and clean stops being on the table. They know where I live, they know what I look like. They just executed a man for being a loose end, and I am the loosest end left standing. You're not a loose end. Vincent's voice dropped lower, harder, something igniting behind his eyes that Claire had never seen in 2 years of watching him run boardrooms and crush competitors with nothing but careful words. You're under my protection, and Dominic Castellano is about to remember exactly what that used to mean. 11 years ago, before he got comfortable thinking I'd let my father's death go unanswered forever. Marcus lowered his phone, face grim. No body yet. Nothing at the hospitals, nothing with the morgue. Could mean he's still alive somewhere. Could mean they haven't dumped him where anyone's looking yet. Get Dante and the rest of the team to the house. Full lockdown. Nobody in or out without my say. Vincent's voice had shifted entirely now, command replacing comfort, and Claire watched him transform in real time from the man who'd held her shaking against his chest 30 seconds earlier into something colder, more absolute. And get me Castellano's location. Tonight. I don't care what it costs. Vincent. Marcus's voice carried a warning. If you go after him directly, I'm not asking for a debate, Marcus. I'm asking for a location. His tone left no room. Marcus held his gaze for 1 more second, then nodded once and turned away, already dialing. Claire grabbed Vincent's arm, forcing him to look at her, her nails digging into the fabric of his sleeve hard enough that he must have felt it through the cloth. If you go after this man yourself, you become exactly what he is. You become a headline. You become exactly what your father's death was supposed to warn you away from becoming. My father's death taught me that men like Castellano only stop when the cost of continuing becomes higher than the cost of stopping. Vincent's eyes were dark and unflinching, and underneath the fury Claire saw something else. 11 years of grief that had never once been allowed to surface, finally cracking through the careful composure he'd built his entire adult life around. I let it go for 11 years because I told myself it was strategy, patience, the smart play. Tonight he sent 2 men to threaten you in a parking garage and joked about murdering a man like it was a punchline. I am done being strategic, Claire. I am done being patient. Then be smart instead. Her voice came out fierce, surprising them both, 2 years of swallowed anger finally finding a target worth aiming it at. You want to protect me? Don't become a corpse in a parking garage yourself trying to prove something to a ghost. Use what you actually have, the company, the lawyers, the financial trail Marcus has already built, the fraud case sitting in that folder upstairs with my name and Rachel Mendez's name both on it. Bury him in something he can't shoot his way out of. Something shifted in Vincent's face, the fury banking slightly, recalculating. The businessman underneath the grieving sun surfacing for just long enough to actually hear her. You want to fight him with paperwork? I want to fight him with everything. Paperwork and pressure and every camera in this city, because a man like that survives in the dark. And the second this becomes public, the fraud, Rachel Mendez, whatever happened to Logan tonight, he can't make all of it disappear at once. He spent years making sure nothing sticks to him. We make sure something finally does. Vincent stared at her for a long moment in the flickering fluorescent light of the garage, something fierce and startled moving behind his eyes, like he was seeing an entirely new dimension of her unfold in real time. 2 years, he said quietly. 2 years I've worked beside you, and I don't think I ever once saw you like this. 2 years I never had a reason to be like this. Her chest was heaving, breath ragged, but her voice had stopped shaking entirely. Logan made me small because small was easier to control. Nobody's controlling anything tonight. Marcus's phone buzzed in his hand, sharp and sudden, and he answered fast, listening, his face going progressively tighter with every passing second, until he finally lowered it and looked at both of them with an expression that told Claire, before he even spoke, that whatever news he was about to deliver would change everything again. They found him, Marcus said. Logan, he's alive, barely, beaten, dumped behind a warehouse in Red Hook, but alive. EMS has him now. He paused, and the next words came slower, heavier. He's conscious, and he's asking for Claire by name. Says he'll tell us everything Castellano's planning, but only if she comes in person and only if she comes alone. No, Vincent said, before Marcus had even fully lowered the phone. Absolute no. He won't talk to anyone else. Marcus's voice was apologetic but firm, a man delivering facts he didn't like any more than they did. EMS says he's stable enough to hold a conversation, but they're not promising how long. If we want what's in his head, it's now, and it's her, or it's nothing. Then it's nothing. Vincent turned to Claire, both hands closing over her shoulders, his grip hard enough to anchor her in place. I am not sending you into a room alone with the man who let Castellano's people use you as a door for 2 years, on the word of the people who just beat him half to death. He's the one who's scared now, Vincent. Claire kept her voice level, even though her pulse was a freight train in her ears. Beaten and dumped behind a warehouse changes a man's priorities real fast. He's not asking for me because he wants to hurt me. He's asking because I'm the only person left in this whole mess he hasn't completely betrayed yet, and some animal part of him still thinks that means something. That's exactly why it's dangerous. He'll use whatever's left of that to manipulate you. Then I'll know it when it happens. I'm not the same woman who stood on that rooftop 2 nights ago and let him call her nothing in front of 200 people. She held his gaze, steady, daring him to argue with what he could plainly see in her face. You don't get to protect me out of the one conversation that might actually end this clean, not after everything tonight already cost. Vincent's jaw worked, the muscle ticking, 11 years of grief and 22 months of careful love warring visibly behind his eyes. I go as far as the door, he said finally. Marcus and 2 more men outside. You wear a wire. The second anything in that room feels wrong, you say a word, say coffee. And we come through that door whether Logan Pierce is mid-sentence or not. Coffee, Claire repeated, and something almost like a smile flickered at the corner of her mouth despite everything. Fine coffee. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and old fear. Fluorescent light buzzing low over a bed where Logan Pierce lay with one eye swollen shut, his jaw wired, an IV taped into the back of one bruised hand. He looked smaller than she remembered him. Smaller than the man who'd stood on a rooftop with a microphone and called her nothing in front of 200 people. Smaller than the man whose key had turned in her lock the night before like he owned the place. Claire. His voice came out wet, slurred around the wire in his jaw. You came. Talk fast. She stayed standing by the door, arms crossed, every muscle in her body coiled tight. I'm not here for an apology. I don't have one. His one good eye found hers, and for the first time in 2 years she saw something in his face that wasn't performance. Raw, Animal fear, stripped of every charm and every lie he'd ever used on her. Castellano's people did this because I tried to negotiate. Tried to tell them I'd handle Vincent's people myself, buy more time. They didn't want more time. They wanted me gone before I could be a liability. He coughed, wet and ragged, and Claire watched him fight through real pain to keep talking. He's planning something tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight. There's a shipment moving through one of Vincent's construction sites in Red Hook. Has been for months, hidden inside concrete deliveries, and Castellano's afraid the financial trail your people pulled is about to expose the whole operation. He wants Vincent dead before that happens. Tonight. Claire's blood went cold. Where? The Red Hook site. 11 o'clock. 2 shooters, positioned on the scaffolding levels, made to look like a robbery gone wrong. Logan's working eye welled, and for one disorienting second, Claire almost believed the wetness in it was real grief and not just physical pain. I'm telling you because if Vincent dies tonight, Castellano owns everything that's left standing, including whatever happens to you. I did a lot of unforgivable things to you, Claire. I'm not doing that one too. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything at all. She turned, walked back out into the hallway where Vincent was already moving toward her, his face a battlefield of fury and fear, and she said one word, Red Hook, and the entire night detonated into motion. The drive to Red Hook took 11 minutes that felt like 11 hours. Vincent on the phone the entire way, voice clipped and absolute, rerouting his security team, calling in favors Claire didn't fully understand. Every sentence out of his mouth a small act of war. Marcus drove like the city had cleared itself just for them, and Claire sat in the back seat with her hands pressed flat against her thighs, watching the orange sodium lights smear past the window, thinking about a rooftop 2 nights ago that felt like it belonged to a different woman's life entirely. You don't go in, Vincent said, turning to face her as the construction site's skeletal frame rose up out of the dark ahead of them, scaffolding climbing into a starless sky like the ribs of something enormous and unfinished. Whatever happens, you stay in this car. Vincent, I am not negotiating this one, Claire. His voice cracked, just slightly, the first real crack she'd heard in it all night, and underneath the command she heard something raw and pleading. I have already lost one parent to this man. I am not giving him the chance to take you too. Please. This is the one thing I am asking you to just let me have. She looked at him for a long moment, at the exhaustion carved into his face, at 22 months of silent love finally cracked wide open by one impossible night, and she nodded, throat too tight to speak. The car stopped 2 blocks out. Vincent and 4 of his men moved into the dark on foot, fanning out toward the scaffolding, and Claire sat in the back seat with Marcus beside her, both of them silent, watching the construction site swallow the men whole, the only light the distant orange wash of a street lamp and the faint ghostly glow of safety lights strung along the lower scaffold levels. Minutes crawled. Claire's heartbeat filled the silence of the car, loud enough that she could hear it in her own ears, a frantic, useless metronome counting down something she had no way to measure. Then the gunfire started. 3 shots, sharp and flat in the open night air, followed by a longer exchange, faster, overlapping, and Claire's whole body lurched forward against the seatbelt before Marcus's arm shot out and held her back. Stay in the car, he barked, already opening his own door, weapon drawn, and then he was gone too, swallowed by the same darkness, and Claire was alone. She didn't stay in the car. She told herself later it wasn't bravery, wasn't recklessness. It was simply that sitting still, while the only people she had left in the world fought for their lives 200 yards away, was a physical impossibility, a thing her body refused to do regardless of what her mind understood about safety. She was out of the car and moving before she'd consciously decided to move, ducking low along a chain-link fence, following the dying echo of gunfire toward the skeletal frame of the building rising against the dark. She found Vincent at the base of the scaffolding, one of his men down beside him clutching a bleeding shoulder, Vincent himself pressed flat against a concrete pillar, breathing hard, blood. Not his, she prayed, not his, smeared across one forearm. Claire, his voice cracked with something between fury and terror when he saw her. I told you. I know what you told me. She dropped beside him, breathless, every cell in her body screaming. I couldn't. Above them, on the 3rd scaffold level, a shape moved against the dark, the dull metallic glint of a rifle catching the faint orange streetlight, and Vincent's hand closed around the back of Claire's neck, forcing her head down hard against the concrete a half second before a shot cracked off the pillar above them, fragments of stone spraying down onto her shoulders. "Stay down." His voice was a ragged whisper against her ear, his whole body curled protectively over hers, and Claire felt his heart slamming against her back, frantic, human, terrified in a way the calm, controlled billionaire she'd known for 2 years had never once let her see. Marcus's voice crackled through a radio clipped to Vincent's collar, low and urgent. "Second shooter neutralized. 1 left, 3rd level, northeast corner. We need a clean angle." "I can give you one." Vincent's voice had gone flat again, the fear folding itself back down into something usable. "Cover Claire, I'm moving." "Vincent, no!" But he was already gone, low and fast along the base of the structure, and Claire pressed herself against the concrete pillar with her hands over her head, listening to her own breath tear in and out of her lungs, listening for the next shot, praying, actually praying, for the first time in years, that it wouldn't find him. It came 2 minutes later, a single shot, then a heavy silence that stretched on long enough that Claire's whole chest seized around the absence of sound, and then Marcus's voice on the radio, breathless. "Shoot her down. Vincent, you good? Vincent, Vincent." A long, terrible pause. "I'm good." Vincent's voice finally came through, rough, winded. "Grazed. I'm fine. Get the medic up here for Daniels, and somebody get Claire out of this." She was already moving toward the sound of his voice before he finished the sentence, scrambling up off the concrete, running across broken ground in the dark toward the silhouette emerging from behind a stack of rebar, one hand pressed against his own bicep, blood dark and wet between his fingers. "You're shot!" Her voice broke entirely on the words. "Grazed," he said again, like the distinction mattered, like it would stop her hands from shaking as she reached him, both palms coming up to frame his face, the way his had framed hers in that parking garage hours earlier, an entire lifetime ago. "I'm alive, Claire. Look at me. I'm alive. You could have died. You could have actually died tonight over a man who's been dead 11 years in a war I didn't even know existed until 24 hours ago. And you ran into gunfire instead of staying in a car, so I don't think either of us has the moral high ground to stand on right now." Something in his voice, despite the blood, despite the adrenaline still roaring through both of them, carried the faintest edge of dark humor, the first lightness either of them had allowed themselves in what felt like 100 years. "Come here." She went. His good arm wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, just stood there in the wreckage of a half-finished building with sirens beginning to wail somewhere in the distance. Two people who had spent 2 years circling something neither had been brave enough to name, finally standing close enough to feel each other's heartbeats slow back down towards something survivable. The weeks that followed moved differently than any weeks Claire had ever lived through before. Faster in some ways, the legal machinery of justice grinding through arraignments and depositions, and a federal investigation into Castellano logistics that started peeling back layer after layer of buried fraud the moment the financial trail connecting Logan, Rachel Mendez, and a half-dozen other victims finally surfaced in daylight. Slower in others, the quiet, deliberate pace of a life being rebuilt one honest day at a time. Logan recovered enough to testify against Castellano in exchange for a reduced sentence on the fraud charges, and Claire sat 3 rows behind the prosecution during the hearing where he finally said her name in a courtroom instead of a hospital bed, finally admitted under oath to forging her signature, to the offshore account, to 2 years of calculated cruelty dressed up as love. She didn't cry. She'd expected to. Instead, she felt something close to relief, the particular relief of watching a lie finally collapse under its own weight in front of witnesses who couldn't look away. Vanessa testified, too, against her own legal advice, naming every detail she knew about the forged loan and the planned disappearance to Lisbon, and when it was over, she found Claire in the courthouse hallway and simply said, "Thank you for not letting me get away with it," before walking out of Claire's life for good. Claire never saw her again. She didn't need to. Dominic Castellano didn't survive to stand trial. Federal agents raiding one of his properties in New Jersey found him already gone. A heart attack, the official report said. Though Vincent's face when he heard the news carried an expression Claire chose not to examine too closely. Not satisfaction exactly, but something adjacent to it, 11 years of grief finally permitted to set down whatever weight it had been carrying. "It's not the ending I wanted," he told her, the night the news broke, the two of them sitting on the floor of his living room with takeout containers between them because neither of them had felt like pretending at anything formal that evening. "I wanted him in a courtroom. I wanted him to answer for my father in front of people. He doesn't get to slip out the back door of his own life clean." "Maybe he didn't slip out clean," Claire said quietly. "Maybe dying with everything finally collapsing around him, knowing it was all coming apart, is its own kind of answering." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, something soft moving behind his eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "Around the time a man I trusted for 2 years turned out to be a weapon, and the boss I worked beside turned out to be the only person telling me the truth." She set down her chopsticks, met his eyes fully, no flinching left in her anywhere. "I've had a lot of time to think since that rooftop, Vincent, about what I actually want, not what's easy, not what someone else decided for me. And what do you want?" "I want to stop being careful with you." The words came out steadier than she expected. 2 years of unspoken things finally finding their way into open air. "I've watched you be careful with me for 22 months. I think it's time both of us stopped." He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at her across the space between them, takeout containers forgotten, the city lights of Manhattan glittering faintly through the windows behind him. Then he reached out, slow and certain, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with the same hand that had been grazed by a bullet weeks earlier, the wound healing now into a thin pale line he'd carry for the rest of his life. 22 months, he said quietly. "I memorized the way you take your coffee. I memorized your mother's Sunday calls. I told myself I was being respectful, giving you space, and some of that was true. But some of it was fear too, Claire. Fear that if I told you everything I felt, I'd lose the only version of you I was allowed to have. You're not going to lose me." She closed the distance herself this time, no hesitation in it at all. "Not to fear, not to silence, not to anything else. I spent 2 years with a man who made me small enough to control. I'm not interested in spending the rest of my life being careful with someone who's never once tried to make me anything other than exactly who I am." The kiss that followed wasn't dramatic, wasn't a rooftop scene built for an audience of 200. It was quiet, certain, two people finally choosing each other in a living room littered with cold takeout. No microphones, no witnesses, nothing performed for anyone watching. It was, Claire thought later, the first thing either of them had done in this entire story that belonged completely and only to them. They married 8 months later, a small ceremony at a vineyard upstate, no more than 40 guests, all of them people who had actually earned a place in the room. Marta, Marcus, and his wife, a handful of Vincent's most trusted people. Claire's mother crying quietly in the front row through the entire 15-minute exchange of vows. There was no microphone, no audience of strangers waiting to be entertained by someone else's pain. Just the two of them, standing in late afternoon light, saying true things to each other in front of people who had watched them earn every word. Claire kept working, eventually stepping into a director-level role she'd built herself, contract by contract, decision by decision, never once asking Vincent to hand her anything she hadn't already proven she deserved. She found, in the months and years that followed, that the version of herself Logan had spent 2 years trying to shrink down into something manageable had never actually disappeared. It had simply been waiting, patient and intact, for someone willing to see all of it. On a quiet evening 18 months after the gala that had once nearly broken her, Claire stood at the window of Vincent's midtown office, 2 coffee cups on the desk behind her, his black with no sugar, hers black with a splash of cream because it happened to be a Monday, and Mondays, even now, were sometimes hard. The Manhattan skyline spread out below them in its endless, indifferent glitter, the same city that had watched her humiliated on a rooftop now simply continuing on, unaware and unbothered the way cities always did. "You're quiet tonight," Vincent said, coming to stand beside her, his hand finding hers on the windowsill the way it always did now, easy and certain, nothing careful left in it at all. "I was just thinking about how far away that woman feels," Claire said. "The one on the rooftop. I can still see her clearly. I just don't feel like her anymore." "Good." Vincent lifted his coffee, the small, ordinary gesture of a man who had learned, finally, that love wasn't built from grand declarations shouted into a microphone, but from 1,000 quiet acts nobody else would ever witness. The right amount of cream on a Monday, a hand finding another in the dark, a promise kept simply because it was made. She did her job. She got you here. Outside the window, the city lights blurred into something almost soft, almost forgiving, and Claire leaned into him, coffee warm between her hands, and let herself finally simply be still.